You don't get a name like the Man in Black without having some darkness in your soul. Johnny Cash may have laid his heart bare in music, but the truth of his tragic story goes deeper than you may have heard.
Johnny Cash was the fourth of 7 children, born February 26, 1932 in Kingsland, Arkansas, to Ray and Carrie Cash. In his memoir, Johnny Cash, the autobiography, Cash recalled that the house in which he was born didn't have any windows, and in winter, his mother had to hang blankets to keep them warm. The Depression hit the Cash family hard, but when Johnny was 3 years old, they moved to the Dias colony in northeast Arkansas, taking part in a federal farming program in which the family farmed 20 acres of cotton and other crops. When he was 5, Johnny started working the fields alongside his parents and siblings. He started first as a water boy, carrying drinking water out to his family. By the time he was 8, he was picking cotton with them, dragging a heavy canvas sack that started empty, but by the end of the day held 200 or more pounds of cotton. Cash wrote in his memoir, "It wasn't complicated. You just parked the wagon at one end of the rows and went to it." He said the work was exhausting and painful. He had back pain, even as a child, and the cotton bolls he picked were sharp, which cut his hands. Cash remembered, "We just worked and worked and worked." One Saturday morning when Johnny Cash was 12, he asked his older brother Jack to go fishing. Jack declined, since he had a job cutting oak trees into posts and working at a table saw. In his autobiography, Cash remembers begging his brother to skip the work, but Jack said no. Cash went by himself, but the time he spent there felt listless, and eventually he left and headed for home. On his way back, his father met him on the road in a panic. There had been an accident, and Jack was badly hurt. He had been pulled into the saw and cut from his ribs through his stomach to his groin. Jack clung on to life for close to a week before finally succumbing. Cash later remembered, "After Jack's death, I felt like I'd died too. I had no other friend." As he grew up, Cash felt his brother's influence on him. Cash wrote, "The most important question in my life has been, which is Jack's way? Which direction would he have taken?" Jack even showed up in Cash's dreams from time to time. Usually when Cash was either doing something he shouldn't have been doing or about to do something he shouldn't have been doing. In the dreams, Jack would know what Cash wanted to do and would look at him with an admonishing smile. According to Cash, there's no fooling Jack. When Cash was in the Air Force, he incessantly wrote letters to a woman named Vivian Liberto, who he had met at a roller rink and would later marry after leaving the service. Their domestic situation was a relatively normal one, in the sense that he got a job and they started a family, but all that changed when Cash started playing and recording music. Cash had a hit record, Cry Cry Cry, that compelled him to go out on tour, and that spelled trouble for their marriage. Eventually, according to biographer Steve Turner, Cash was away from home up to 80% of the year, traveling some 300,000 miles in the process. Unfortunately, during his time, he also began to succumb to his addiction to amphetamines and alcohol, and also developed an eye for the attractive, sassy women he'd often meet on the road. Around this time, he also met and began flirting with June Carter, who would go on to become his second wife. Cash's time on the road made his time at home difficult to bear. His eldest daughter, Roseanne, would later remember, "It got to where it was like somebody else was coming home, not my daddy. The drugs were at work, he'd stay up all night, he and my mom would fight. It was so sad." According to another of his daughters, Cindy, Vivian would often put her children in the car and go looking for a drunken Cash around town. She finally filed for divorce in 1966, and it was granted the following year. In 1961, Cash and his wife Vivian moved with their 4 daughters to Casita Springs in Ventura County, California, where Vivian hoped he would be convinced to give up the pills and alcohol that had become an integral and dangerous part of his life. Instead, his problems got worse, particularly with amphetamines. His daughter Roseanne later said, "In my pre-teen years, my father's drug addiction was really consuming him and my parents' marriage. There was just this background tension and anxiety to all of those years." The pills would leave his voice a mere croak, and it got to the point where he was having trouble performing. Often, he never showed up to his gigs at all. After all, he was still an addict and an alcoholic. He couldn't just take one pill. He needed a handful. He couldn't just have one drink. He needed to empty out his hotel room's minibar. Cash's struggles continued in the 80s when he was prescribed pain medication for various surgeries and illnesses and continued to take them after he no longer needed them. Luckily, Cash didn't face these demons alone. The singer's struggles required a steadying influence in his life, so when he couldn't manage himself, he leaned on his second wife, June.
She's not only a lady who I share my life with, but she may have been the person responsible for me still being alive.
Strangely enough, the man who sang so convincingly about shooting a man in Reno just to watch him die was never once in his life incarcerated in an actual prison. He was, however, arrested several times for a variety of offenses related to drugs, either for procuring them or for his many escapades under their influence. Steve Turner's Cash biography tells the story of October 1965, when Cash took a flight to El Paso, Texas, then caught a cab to take him across the Mexican border to Juarez, where he bought 668 dexedrine and 475 Equinil tablets on the black market and hid them in his guitar. Unfortunately for him, the dealer was under surveillance for allegedly selling heroin. Cash was arrested at the airport and held overnight on drug smuggling charges. He also faced charges back in El Paso for possession of the pills. Earlier that year, in May, Cash was drunk and out well past curfew in Starkville, Mississippi, when police arrested him and put him in a holding cell overnight to sober up. According to Rolling Stone, Cash kicked his foot against the cell door so hard that he broke one of his toes. And in November 1967, while under the influence of pills, Cash went on a joyride through Georgia before banging on the door of a rural home until the police were summoned. His arrest that time netted him a night in jail. Cash often told a story about a time in which he was so deep in the throes of drug-related despair that he found himself completely robbed of the will to live. According to Cash, he trekked up to the Nickajack Cave in Tennessee in the fall of 1967. In his autobiography, he wrote, "Nickajack contained the remains of many cave explorers, amateur adventurers who'd lost their lives in the caves over the years, usually by losing their way, and it was my hope and intention to join their company." Cash said he crawled through the cave for several hours until his flashlight batteries gave out, at which point he laid down in the pitch dark, ready to die. He said he'd never felt so far from God, but as he laid there, an epiphany came over him, that perhaps it wasn't his time to die. He got up and found his way out of the cave in the dark, guided by a small draft of air, and subsequently promised to quit drugs that very day. Cash recounted this story many times. It's published in his memoir and in a number of magazines and books that cover his life, but the story has many detractors. For example, Marshall Grant, Cash's friend and former bass player, says it never happened. And Robert Hilburn, Cash's biographer, notes that the Nickajack Cave was underwater in the fall of 1967, since the Army Corps of Engineers had dammed it up. He also wrote, Cash did not quit drugs that day. In April 2003, June Carter Cash had been diagnosed with a leaky heart valve, and after a battery of tests, doctors determined that valve replacement surgery was the only option to fix her problem and prolong her life. According to Steve Turner's biography of her husband, she initially balked at the prospect of going under the knife, claiming that at 73, she was too old for the operation. Johnny Cash begged her to have the surgery, claiming he wasn't ready for her to leave him. June finally relented and had the surgery on May 7th, but early the next morning she went into cardiac arrest. It took doctors 20 minutes to resuscitate her, after which they put her on life support. 3 days later, doctors performed more tests to see if she responded to stimuli, an indicator of whether she had any brain function. No one was certain how long her brain had been deprived of oxygen during the cardiac episode and resuscitation efforts. Johnny Cash gave permission for life support to be switched off, and June's bodily functions were expected to shut down over the course of 3 or so hours. Instead, she lingered for 3 days. On May 15th, with her family standing vigil around her bed, June Carter Cash passed away.
We're friends, and we're sweethearts and lovers, and we're married, and we're happy.
Within 4 months of his wife June's death, Johnny Cash would also be gone, but not before doing one last bit of work. In the days immediately following June's funeral, Cash reflected on his wife's life and their time together, which added up to 35 years of marriage, with very little of that time spent apart. He tried to keep busy too. Mere days after June's funeral, Cash was back in the recording studio with legendary producer Rick Rubin, adding to the collection of songs the two had stockpiled for the American Recordings series. But his ill health continued. In his final weeks, he would be hospitalized with pancreatitis, and 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, Johnny Cash died of complications from diabetes. He was 71 years old.
Johnny Cash was bigger than life, but while the details of the music legend's life and career have become the stuff of myth, in reality, Cash had a dark side that was even darker than you might know, like the time he almost single-handedly caused the extinction of an entire species. On June 27, 1965, Cash went camping with his nephew Damon Fielder at California's Los Padres National Forest. According to the Los Angeles Times, both men argued for most of the trip, as Fielder was bothered by his uncle's heavy drinking and pill popping. According to Fielder, that night, Cash, apparently feeling the need to keep warm, made a fire. Unfortunately, the fire quickly spread out of control and ended up destroying more than 500 acres of land and killing 49 critically endangered California condors. Fielder believed that his uncle might have been so wasted on booze and amphetamines that he allowed the blaze to go out of control. Given the circumstances, it was no surprise that investigators held Cash liable for the fire. While giving his sworn testimony in court, he told a different story from that of his nephew. He claimed that a malfunctioning exhaust pipe on his camper was to blame for the blaze, quipping, "I didn't do it, my truck did, and it's dead, so you can't question it." He also didn't appear to show remorse after his recklessness nearly caused an entire species to go extinct, allegedly saying at one point, "I don't care about your damn yellow buzzards." Per the Vintage Times, Cash was ultimately found guilty and fined $82,000 for accidentally causing the wildfire. The California condor, meanwhile, officially went extinct in the wild in 1987, but breeding programs in captivity have allowed the species to rebound slightly to just over 500 individuals in recent years. It was far from the last time Cash's addictions would get him in trouble, not just with the law, but with his family and closest loved ones. Despite the happy ending Walk the Line gave the couple, Cash's marriage to June Carter wasn't all a fairy tale. Johnny and June's son, John Carter Cash, revealed that while his parents ostensibly had a perfect marriage, behind closed doors, the suffering continued and it worsened, if anything, throughout the years. That's because, according to the Culture Trip, Cash suffered the first of what would become several relapses in 1977. After entering rehab that year, he was drug-free once again, only to relapse in 1983, again in 1989, then a fourth time in 1992.
I could hear them talking around my bed. I'd be in a fog. I could hear them talking about he may not pull through.
In his book, Anchored in Love, The Life and Legacy of June Carter Cash, John Carter Cash went into greater detail about his parents' substance abuse issues and oftentimes turbulent 35-year marriage. However, he stressed that Johnny and June truly had long-lasting love for each other, saying, "My parents' love for each other lasted throughout their whole life. They didn't give up."
Johnny Cash spent most of the 1990s dealing with health issues. While he was originally misdiagnosed with Shy-Drager syndrome, his doctors later diagnosed him with autonomic neuropathy in 2000, complication of diabetes. According to Johnny Cash, the biography by Michael Streisguth, his neuropathy often resulted in bouts of pneumonia that forced him to spend a lot of time in the hospital. In 2002, after he finished recording for his wife June Carter Cash's album Wildwood Flower, he fell ill again. By this time, he was finding it difficult to walk and had trouble with his eyesight, too. He was taken to the hospital for what seemed to be an allergic reaction. Legendary country star Merle Haggard, who was a close friend, told Rolling Stone, "We knew he'd been sick, and we thought he was going to die so many times over the last couple years. If you want to get really serious, he'd been near death for decades." Johnny Cash lived in constant, serious pain. Although Johnny Cash was in severe pain in the last year of his life and struggled to get things done, he remained stoic and kept his pain to himself, preferring to distract himself with work. As Haggard explained to Rolling Stone, on a scale of 1 to 10, it was somewhere around an 8 for the last 8 years of his life. Haggard added that Cash didn't take care of himself and didn't eat well for a while, which made his bones brittle. Cash ended up breaking his jaw during dental surgery and never quite recovered from it. He lived as an example of a man in pain, going from one stage of bad health to another, but he held his head up the whole way. All Cash wished to do was work on his next album, even as his health issues grew increasingly worse. Music producer Rick Rubin said that Cash somehow could still record and keep his spirits high. One of his qualities was that he would never really talk about pain or if he wasn't doing well, so we never really knew other than when it got so bad he would say, "I can't sing anymore now. I have to lay down for a little while." In his final months, Johnny Cash was committed to music and didn't wish to stop producing albums and singing live. He was very active in the industry and worked tirelessly on his last album, American 4, The Man Comes Around. In fact, Cash recorded about 60 songs in his last 4 months. The recording process was not easy, as Cash struggled with complications from neuropathy, though he never complained about how his illnesses were ravaging his body. Vanity Fair reported that he worried about how it was affecting his signature baritone voice, which now quavered. Still, Cash told NME that he was determined to keep making music no matter what. "Sometimes I came to the studio and I couldn't sing. I came in with no voice when I could have stayed home and pouted in my room and cried in my beer or my milk, but I didn't let that happen. We put more blood, sweat, and tears and love into this one than anything we've ever done. It reaches out even farther and in more directions than the others did." widely regarded as one of his most heart-wrenching covers. Cash's version of the Nine Inch Nails song Hurt was released in 2003. According to Dave Urbanski's book The Man Comes Around, The Spiritual Journey of Johnny Cash, filmmaker Mark Romanek told the author, quote, "I begged Rick Rubin to let me shoot something to that track." Romanek flew to Nashville and was inspired by the Cash Museum. It had been closed for a long time. The place was in such a state of dereliction. That's when I got the idea that maybe we could be extremely candid about the state of Johnny's health, as candid as Johnny has always been in his songs. The video was a massive hit, striking a chord with viewers. However, what many don't know is that Cash's family was initially unsure about the video, asking Romanek to edit it and make it less maudlin. One of Cash's daughters, Roseanne, said, "I didn't want to watch it because we were already in that space of years of intense anxiety about my dad's health and this fear that he was going to die at any moment." In 2002, Johnny Cash released an updated version of an earlier track, Give My Love to Rose. The song was originally produced in 1957 for Sun Records, and Cash chose to revisit it many times in his career. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Cash's daughter Roseanne said, "My father, when he would call my mother from the road, he would say, 'Give my love to Roseanne.' So I think that's probably where it came from. I never asked him outright." In 2003, the song earned Cash a Grammy win for Best Male Country Vocal Performance. It was the last he would win during his lifetime, but he went on to win 2 more posthumously, bringing his total number of Grammy wins to 13 so far. According to Rolling Stone, Cash got back to work just 3 days after June passed away. Rick Rubin told the magazine, he said, "I don't want to do any of the things some people do when they lose their partner. I don't want to go out and spend a lot of money. I don't want to meet girls. I don't want to do anything of this world. I want to make music and do the best work I can. That's what she would want me to do, and that's what I want to do." There were days when his health wouldn't allow him to work. However, Cash would find ways to get back to recording as soon as he felt better. He even started recording with Rubin in his home when he simply didn't have enough strength to head out. Rubin told Rolling Stone, "The last session that I did was in one of the bedrooms." To get through the days and cope with his inner demons, Johnny Cash started relying on his kids. He often suffered through bouts of insomnia after June's death and found himself asking for help as the grief was overwhelming. His daughter Kathy Cash revealed in Johnny Cash the biography that to help him sleep, she would tell him stories until he finally drifted off. And his daughter Cindy Cash said, "He would not let me leave. I was only going to stay for a couple of weeks, and I ended up not leaving at all. Every day he would say, 'You're not leaving, right?' He was like a little boy again." 2 months before he died, Johnny Cash held his last live performance. On July 5, 2003, at the Carter Family Fold in Hiltons, Virginia, Cash and his band performed for a scant half hour. Though Cash was frail to the point where he needed assistance getting to the stage, he still summoned up the energy to perform some of his most beloved hits, including Ring of Fire, I Walk the Line, and Folsom Prison Blues. According to Far Out magazine, Johnny Cash paid a moving tribute to his late wife on stage. "The spirit of June Carter overshadows me tonight. With the love she had for me and the love I have for her, we connect somewhere between here and heaven. She came down for a short visit tonight, I guess, from heaven, to visit with me tonight and give me courage and inspiration, like she always has." The Man in Black made history at MTV's Video Music Awards with 6 nominations in August 2003. He won an award for his take on Hurt, but couldn't make it to the ceremony. As per Entertainment Weekly, the singer was in the hospital where he had been taken to treat pancreatitis. It took him 2 full weeks to recover and get back home. When he returned, he issued a statement that read in part, "I'm excited about my video Hurt winning the MTV Cinematography Award. The making of the video was a great experience for me." Cash was edged out for the Best Pop Video Award by Justin Timberlake for Cry Me a River. In his acceptance speech, Timberlake said, "This is a travesty. I demand a recount. My grandfather raised me on Johnny Cash. I'm from Tennessee, and I think he deserves this more than any of us here tonight." Cash's manager, Lou Robin, told E! Online that Cash appreciated the sentiment. He got a big kick out of what Justin said. He was very appreciative. Right up to the end, Cash was always himself. Honest, forthright, and unapologetic. In his final interview with MTV's Kurt Loder, Cash encouraged people to be themselves and listen to their own conscience, regardless of what anyone else says.
You can't let people delegate to you what you should do when it's coming from way in here, you know?
He said he'd been criticized over the years for tackling tough topics, but he had no plans to change.
I wouldn't let anybody influence me into thinking I was doing the wrong thing by singing about death, hell, and drugs, because I've always done that, and I always will.
Still, he was also realistic about his health, saying, quote, "I expect my life to end pretty soon," but he faced his end unafraid.
I have great faith, though. I have unshakable faith. I've never been angry with God.
After decades of struggle with drugs, health woes, and authority, the icon Johnny Cash died on September 12, 2003, after suffering from respiratory failure due to complications from diabetes. Cash's passing came just 4 months after his wife June Carter Cash's death, and unleashed a worldwide outpouring of grief and affection for the Man in Black. U2's lead singer Bono told BBC, "I considered myself a friend. He considered me a fan. He indulged me." Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones also paid his respects, saying, "His influence spread over many generations of different people. I loved him as a singer and a writer." Fans prayed for Johnny Cash and his wife, hoping that the two were finally together as they mourned their loss. His daughter, Roseanne Cash, summed things up at his funeral with a heartfelt eulogy, saying, "I can almost live in a world without Johnny Cash because he will always be with us. I cannot begin to imagine a world without Daddy."